You know that feeling when you're trying so hard to stay invisible at work that you start apologizing to the copy machine for taking too long? Multiply that by 5 years, add a 7-year-old daughter who needs breakfast, clean socks, and emotional stability by 7 a.m., and you've got Corbin Wexley's entire life. He wasn't hiding because he had something to hide. He was hiding because visibility, in his experience, only ever led to disaster. A promotion that meant longer hours away from his daughter, a spotlight that meant scrutiny, a reputation that could be undone in a single bad quarter. So when Corbin's alarm buzzed at 5:45 a.m. that Tuesday, rattling against the cheap particle board nightstand he bought second-hand 3 moves ago, he didn't feel dread exactly. He felt the familiar, gray, manageable weight of a day he already knew the shape of. He was wrong. He had no idea how wrong. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the ancient refrigerator and the soft, rhythmic breathing of his daughter Zoe, asleep down the hall with her stuffed elephant, missing one ear, chewed off sometime during the teething years either of them liked to talk about, tucked under her chin. Corbin lay there for a moment, staring at a water stain on the ceiling shaped vaguely like the state of Florida, and catalogued his aches the way he catalogued everything, methodically, without complaint. A dull throb behind his left eye from 3 hours of spreadsheets the night before. A crick in his neck from the second-hand mattress that had never quite recovered its shape. He was 31 years old and some mornings he felt like a man twice that age, worn thin by the particular exhaustion of doing everything alone. He pushed himself upright anyway, because there was no other option, and padded barefoot into the kitchen to start the coffee that would carry him through whatever the day decided to throw at him. He didn't have to wait long. Zoe appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:10, hair in a lopsided bonnet, dragging her one-eared elephant by its trunk, and announced with the flat, devastating confidence only a 7-year-old possesses. "I need a diorama of the solar system for school today." Corbin froze mid-pour, coffee threatening to overflow the mug. "Today," he repeated slowly, like the word might rearrange itself into something less catastrophic if he said it carefully enough. "Mrs. Alvarez said Friday?" Zoe shrugged, entirely unbothered by the logistical avalanche she had just triggered. "She changed it. She said it's more fun as a surprise." Corbin closed his eyes and thought, not for the first time, that elementary school teachers had entirely too much unchecked power. By 6:45, he had raided the recycling bin for a shoebox, borrowed glitter glue from a downstairs neighbor he barely knew, and improvised a passable Saturn out of a styrofoam ball and a hair tie. It wasn't pretty. It would have to do. He dropped Zoe at school with a kiss on the forehead and a diorama that looked more like abstract art than astronomy, and by 8:02 he was sliding into his cubicle at Holbrook Freight and Logistics, a company that occupied 18 floors of glass and steel in downtown Denver and moved more cargo through the Rocky Mountain corridor than any of its competitors combined. Corbin was a junior risk analyst, a title that sounded impressive at dinner parties he never attended and meant, in practice, that his job was to stare at enormous spreadsheets and predict exactly how and why the company might lose money. He liked it precisely because nobody noticed him doing it. Numbers didn't lie, didn't gossip, didn't require him to perform confidence he didn't feel. If he kept his head down, hid his numbers, and never drew attention to himself, he got a steady paycheck, decent insurance for Zoe, and the sacred, non-negotiable privilege of leaving the building by 5:30 sharp to make it to pick up on time. Survival at Holbrook meant staying off one radar in particular, the radar of Marlo Castellan, the CEO. Marlo had taken over the company at 29, after her father's sudden death left the board scrambling and the business press circling like vultures, certain she'd run the company into the ground within 18 months. Instead, she'd restructured 3 divisions, absorbed 2 struggling competitors, and doubled the company's valuation in 4 years, all while becoming known, in hushed breakroom conversations, as someone who moved through the building like a drop in barometric pressure. Rooms got quieter when she entered them. People stood a little straighter. Corbin had seen her exactly 4 times in 2 years, always from a safe distance, always grateful the distance held. At 9:47 a.m. that Tuesday, his inbox pinged with a calendar invite that made his stomach drop. An emergency meeting, 10 minutes from now, conference room A, all senior and junior analysts required. He grabbed his legal pad and told himself it was probably nothing. He was wrong about that too. You should hit subscribe now, because Corbin has no idea the next 10 minutes are about to change everything. Conference room A was the kind of room designed to make people uncomfortable. Floor-to-ceiling windows, chairs that cost more than Corbin's monthly rent, and lighting so harsh it made even the confident executives look faintly guilty of something. Corbin slid into a seat at the far end of the table, half hidden behind a large potted fern that had clearly been placed there by someone with excellent instincts about where nervous employees liked to sit. The room filled quickly with junior analysts trading anxious glances and senior VPs pretending to check emails while their knees bounced under the table. Nobody knew exactly what the emergency was, only that emergencies at Hallbrook rarely meant good news, and that Marlowe Castellan calling an all-hands meeting on a Tuesday morning meant someone, somewhere, was about to have a very bad day. The heavy glass doors swung open at exactly 10 o'clock, and Marlowe walked in without a word of greeting. She wasn't dressed like the intimidating figure of company legend, no severe blazer, no armor of power dressing, just a simple charcoal dress and low heels, her dark hair pulled back in a knot so precise it looked almost architectural. She didn't need the costume. She commanded the room through sheer, suffocating stillness, the kind of quiet that made everyone lean forward just to make sure they didn't miss anything. She sat at the head of the table, opened a tablet, and looked up with pale gray eyes that seemed to have long ago run out of patience for excuses. "The Denver to Phoenix corridor numbers," she said, voice quiet enough that the whole room instinctively held its breath. "Someone explained to me why they look like a fairy tale." A VP named Holloway stood up too fast, straightening his tie with visibly damp palms, and launched into a presentation thick with the kind of corporate language designed to say nothing while sounding like everything. Strategic realignment, market resilience, forward-leaning optimization. Corbin stared down at his legal pad, jaw tight, because he'd run these exact numbers 3 days earlier and they told a very different story. A fuel surcharge spike, a driver shortage across 2 states, and a projection that conveniently ignored both. Holloway was either lying or squinting so hard at the data that he talked himself into a fantasy. Either way, the room was about to get very expensive for someone. "Stop," Marlowe said, and Holloway froze mid-sentence, mouth still open. She scanned the table slowly. "Is anyone in this room going to tell me the truth, or are we going to keep pretending the numbers agree with him?" Nobody moved. Corbin kept his eyes on his notepad, silently begging the fern beside him to grow just a little taller. Then the analyst next to him elbowed him sharply in the ribs, hard enough to make him flinch, and Marlowe's gaze swung directly onto him like a searchlight finding its target. "You," she said. "In the back. Name." Corbin's mouth went dry. "Corbin Wexley," he managed. "Well, Corbin Wexley, you've been shaking your head at every slide for the last 4 minutes. What is Holloway leaving out?" He thought about his mortgage. He thought about the shoebox diorama and the socks he still needed to buy Zuri and the very real possibility of unemployment. Then he thought about the fact that lying to a CEO's face was probably worse than losing a job he was already barely holding onto by his fingernails. "The driver shortage," he said finally, voice steadier than he felt. "And the fuel surcharge hike from 3 weeks ago. Neither of those are in his model. If they were, this wouldn't be a fairy tale, it'd be a $6 million shortfall by October." The silence that followed was the kind that precedes an execution. Holloway's face went a shade of red Corbin had never seen on a human being before. "Ms. Castellan, with respect, Mr. Wexley is a junior analyst, he doesn't have full visibility into. Mr. Wexley just told me exactly what I already suspected." Marlowe interrupted, her eyes never leaving Corbin, studying him like a puzzle she hadn't expected to find in the back row. "Update the model. Send it to me directly by 5. She stood, gathered her tablet, and walked out without another word, leaving the room in stunned silence behind her. Corbin sat frozen in his chair as the door clicked shut, realizing 2 things at once. He had just publicly humiliated a vice president, and the CEO of the company now knew his name. He was going to need to update his resume tonight, But if you've ever accidentally shown up your boss in a meeting and lived to regret it, drop a comment and tell us, because Corbin's regret was only just getting started. 3 days passed, and Corbin did not get fired, which somehow felt worse than if he had. Instead, a slow, creeping paranoia settled over his desk like fog. His direct manager stopped making eye contact. Holloway walked past his cubicle like Corbin was a puddle he didn't want to splash through. And worst of all, Marlo Castellan kept showing up in his workday without ever physically appearing, her assistant emailing him directly, bypassing 3 layers of management, asking for specific data sets with unnerving frequency. Marlo wants your projections on the Phoenix hub. Marlo wants the raw numbers on the Salt Lake route. Corbin became convinced, with the particular clarity of the deeply sleep-deprived, that she was quietly building an airtight case to fire him, one data request at a time, and he spent his lunch breaks hunched over his laptop rechecking every formula for a single mistake that might give her the excuse. "You look like a ghost," his older sister Denise announced on Friday evening, letting herself into his apartment with a pizza box balanced on one hip and a bottle of grocery store red wine in the other hand. She dropped the pizza on the kitchen counter, shoving aside a stack of unopened mail and a glittery paper crown Zuri had made at school, and studied her brother with the particular scrutiny only older sisters seemed to be issued at birth. "I feel like a ghost," Corbin muttered, digging out 2 mismatched wine glasses from the cabinet. "My CEO is either about to fire me or promote me, and I genuinely cannot tell which, and both options terrify me equally." Denise laughed, not unkindly, and grabbed a slice of pepperoni. "Sounds like she's interested in you. How's Zuri sleeping?" "She had a full meltdown because I wouldn't let her adopt a stray cat from the parking lot," Corbin said, rubbing the back of his neck. "So, a normal Tuesday, basically." Denise chewed thoughtfully, watching him with the look he'd learned to dread, the one that meant she'd already made a decision on his behalf and was simply waiting for the right moment to announce it. "When's the last time you went out, Corbin? And I don't mean the grocery store. I go out plenty. I took Zuri to the park on Sunday. I mean out. As an adult. With another adult. On something resembling a date." Corbin groaned and leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. "Denise, please, not tonight. I'm 31, I have a kid, a rent payment that eats half my paycheck, and a CEO who might be plotting my professional execution. I do not have the bandwidth for dating." "Your bandwidth is fine," Denise said smoothly, clearly lying. "And Zuri needs a happy dad, not a robot who builds diorama planets out of foil and stress. My friend Tasha runs a small matchmaking service, very discreet, very low-key. She owed me a favor and I called it in. You have a date tomorrow night." Corbin opened his mouth to argue and found, to his own quiet horror, that he didn't have much of a case. He thought about the glittery crown on the counter, about Zuri telling her teacher her dad looked tired lately, about the fact that he hadn't touched another human being in a romantic way since his ex-wife left 3 years earlier, packing 2 suitcases and leaving a note that still lived, unread twice, in the bottom of his sock drawer. He was drowning quietly in spreadsheets and school pickups and had genuinely forgotten what it felt like to be anything other than a father and an employee. "Fine," he breathed, more exhausted than resigned. "One date. If it's a disaster, I never have to do it again. Tomorrow, 7:30, a place called Solane downtown," Denise said, already halfway out the door with her wine glass in hand. "Wear the navy suit. The one that makes your shoulders look like they belong to someone with a personal trainer. Don't slouch. Be charming. Don't talk about spreadsheets." Saturday crawled by in a haze of laundry, times tables, homework at the kitchen table, and mounting dread that built with every passing hour. By 7 p.m., Corbin stood in front of his bathroom mirror, wrestling with a tie he hadn't worn in over a year, watching the navy suit strain slightly across shoulders that had changed shape somewhere in the last 5 years of stress and irregular meals. He studied his own reflection, the faint gray threading through his beard, the tired set of his eyes, and thought, with grim certainty, that he looked exactly like a man with absolutely no business walking into a restaurant with a name he couldn't pronounce. He dropped Zuri at Denise's at 6:45, endured a final round of shoulder straightening and tie adjusting, and drove downtown in his aging sedan, parking 4 blocks away to avoid a valet fee he genuinely could not justify. He had no idea, as he walked those 4 blocks in the cooling evening air, that his entire life was 4 blocks and 45 minutes away from turning completely upside down. And if you've ever let your sister talk you into something you immediately regretted, you already know exactly how Corbin felt right now. Solane did not have a sign out front. It had a heavy oak door, a small brass plaque, and a specific hush of a restaurant that didn't need to advertise because everyone who mattered already knew where it was. Corbin gave his name to a host who looked him up and down with the polite, practiced disdain reserved for people who'd clearly parked 4 blocks away. "Wexley," he said, feeling ridiculous even saying it out loud. "There should be a reservation under a matchmaking service, Tasha's List, I think." The host didn't blink, simply nodded and led him through a maze of candlelit tables toward a curved leather booth tucked behind a decorative wooden partition, private and secluded. The air smelled like truffle oil and old money. Corbin slid into the booth, unbuttoned his jacket, and checked his phone. 7:58 p.m. A waiter appeared, silent as a shadow, and asked if he wanted sparkling or still water. "Just tap is fine," Corbin said, watching the waiter's expression flicker with something dangerously close to pity. He sat there for what felt like an eternity but was, according to his phone, only 12 minutes. The anxiety in his stomach curdled slowly into something sharper, more acidic. What was he even doing here? What was he supposed to say to a stranger? "Hi, I'm Corbin. I calculate shipping risk for a living, and the most exciting thing that happened to me this week was correcting a vice president's spreadsheet and possibly signing my own termination papers." He checked his phone again. 8:11 p.m. A slow, humiliating relief began creeping in. Maybe he'd been stood up. Maybe the universe was simply correcting an obvious clerical error, sparing them both the awkwardness of 2 exhausted strangers pretending to have chemistry over an appetizer neither could afford. He decided he'd give it until 8:15, then he'd quietly slip out, tell Denise it just didn't work out, and never speak of Solane again. He never made it to 8:15. The heavy oak door swung open, and Corbin's breath caught somewhere in the back of his throat. Walking into the restaurant, unmistakable even in the low amber light, was Marlowe Castellan. She wasn't in her usual severe office attire. She wore a deep emerald slip dress that caught the candlelight every time she moved, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders instead of pulled into its usual unforgiving knot. She looked exhausted and radiant at the same time, and utterly, completely terrifying in a context Corbin had never once imagined encountering her in. He sank lower into the booth on pure instinct, heart slamming against his ribs. No. What was his CO doing at the same restaurant, on the same night, at the exact time his blind date was supposed to arrive? He watched her scan the room with the same searching precision she'd used on the boardroom table 3 days earlier, and for one horrifying second, he genuinely considered diving under the table. Then Marlowe's eyes landed on the corner booth, on him. And something in her expression shifted, not surprise exactly, more like recognition sliding into place. She crossed the restaurant without hesitation, heels clicking softly against the stone floor, and slid into the booth directly across from him before he could form a single coherent word. "Corbin Wexley," she said quietly, almost amused, folding her hands on the table. "I have to say, I did not expect my blind date to be the same analyst who publicly humiliated my VP on Tuesday." Corbin's mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. I'm sorry, this can't be real. Tasha's matchmaking thing. That's you?" "Apparently my assistant has been quietly setting these up for months and I finally agreed to one," Marlowe said, something almost human flickering behind her usually unreadable gray eyes. "I didn't ask for a name in advance. I wanted to be surprised." "I think we're both equally surprised," Corbin managed, feeling his pulse hammer somewhere near his throat. For a long moment neither of them spoke, the restaurant noise fading into a strange, private silence around their booth. Then Marlowe did something Corbin had genuinely never seen her do in 2 years of quiet observation from a safe distance. She smiled, small and slightly crooked, like it caught even her off guard. "For what it's worth," she said, "you were right on Tuesday. About the fuel surcharge and the driver shortage. Holloway's numbers were fiction, and everyone in that room knew it, and you were the only person brave enough or foolish enough to say it out loud." "Foolish felt more accurate at the time," Corbin admitted. "I spent 3 days convinced you were building a case to fire me." "I was building a case," Marlowe said, picking up the menu without looking at it. "Just not the one you're imagining." She glanced up, something warmer settling behind her eyes. "I don't do this often, Corbin. Dinner. People. So don't waste it worrying about your job tonight. Worry about ordering something that isn't tap water. If you're already rooting for these two, hit that like button right now, because Chapter 5 is where everything they built tonight gets put to the test." Dinner unfolded slower than Corbin expected, softer than he'd let himself imagine possible for a woman who ran board meetings like weather systems. Marlowe asked about Surrey, and Corbin found himself talking, actually talking, not performing, about the diorama disaster, the missing-eared elephant, the note in the sock drawer he still hadn't thrown away. She listened in a way that felt startlingly rare, like his answers actually mattered and weren't just filler between her own thoughts. In return, she told him, quietly, about her father, about inheriting a company at 29 with a board that expected her to fail within the year, about how exhausting it was to be constantly underestimated by people twice her age who couldn't hide their surprise every single quarter she didn't collapse. By the time the check arrived, Corbin reached for his wallet on reflex and Marlowe simply covered his hand with hers, firm and final. "I invited you," she said. "I'm not letting you pay for dinner." He didn't argue. Something about the way she said it made arguing feel unnecessary. Monday morning arrived wrapped in an entirely different kind of dread, not the anxiety of avoiding attention, but the unsettling uncertainty of not knowing how to act around someone who now knew things about him no coworker should. Corbin barely had time to settle into his cubicle before his phone buzzed with an alert that made his stomach drop straight through the floor. The Salt Lake distribution hub had gone dark overnight, a warehouse fire shutting down operations across 4 states, with 11 trucks currently idling on highways with nowhere to deliver their cargo and no clear rerouting plan. Within 20 minutes, an emergency meeting notice hit every senior analyst's calendar, and Corbin found himself once again walking into conference room A, except this time there was no fern tall enough to hide behind, and everyone in the room already knew his name. Marlowe walked in exactly on time, and if she felt anything about Saturday night, none of it showed on her face. She was pure, focusio, tablet in hand, eyes scanning the room like a hawk assessing a field. "Salt Lake is down," she said, no greeting, no preamble. 11 trucks idling, 4 states affected, and I need a rerouting plan in the next 30 minutes or we lose the entire regional contract. Holloway stood, visibly sweating, and launched into an explanation thick with excuses about unpredictable circumstances and unavoidable delays that no algorithm could have anticipated. "The fire inspector flagged that warehouse 8 months ago," Corbin said, not standing, simply turning his laptop screen around so the whole table could see the maintenance report he'd pulled up the moment the alert came through. "It's in the compliance file." This wasn't unpredictable. It was ignored. Holloway's face flushed a violent, furious red. "Wexley, you are wildly out of your lane. This is not junior analyst territory. I have the lane to read a compliance report." Corbin cut in, surprising even himself with the steadiness in his voice, exhaustion finally burning away whatever fear had kept him quiet for years. "And that report says this fire was preventable. If we reroute the idling trucks through the Provo backup facility right now and eat the extra fuel cost, we save roughly 70% of today's deliveries. If we wait for an official response plan, we lose the entire regional contract by Thursday." The boardroom went completely, utterly silent, several executives staring at Corbin like he'd grown a second head in front of them. Marlowe studied him for a long, unreadable moment, her expression giving away absolutely nothing to the room, and then she turned, without a flicker of hesitation, to Holloway. "Clear your desk. You had 8 months of warning and you sat on it. Security will walk you out." She stood, gathered her tablet, and addressed the stunned room in the same quiet voice that never needed to be raised. Corbin Wexley is now acting director of risk operations, effective immediately. He'll lead the Provo rerouting personally. Anyone who slows him down answers to me. Then she walked out, leaving the room to erupt into the low, frantic buzz of executives recalculating their entire professional hierarchy in real time. Corbin sat frozen at the table for a full 10 seconds, staring at his laptop, absorbing the fact that he'd just gone from an invisible cubicle to acting director in the space of one boardroom meeting, with absolutely no idea how he was going to survive the next 12 hours, let alone the job itself. He barely had time to process it before his phone buzzed with orders to coordinate a 4-state rerouting plan by lunch. Subscribe now if you want to see whether Corbin sinks or swims, because Chapter 6 is where everything finally comes together. Corbin survived the next 12 hours on stale coffee, pure adrenaline, and a stubborn refusal to let anyone see him panic. He barked directions to drivers in 3 time zones, argued with a warehouse manager in Provo who didn't want to accept the overflow, and authorized emergency expenses that made his stomach physically hurt every time he typed in the numbers. By 9 p.m., the office had emptied out completely, fluorescent lights humming over rows of dark, silent cubicles, and Corbin was finally packing his bag to head home when his desk phone rang once, sharp in the quiet. "Come up," Marlowe's voice said simply, and hung up before he could respond. He took the private elevator to the top floor for the first time in his life, stepping out onto thick carpet and dark wood paneling that felt like an entirely different building from the one he worked in every day. Her office was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering spread of downtown Denver, the Rockies just visible as a dark silhouette against the night sky. Marlowe stood by the window holding a glass of something amber, shoes kicked off beside her desk, looking more tired than Corbin had ever seen her. But there was something lighter in her posture too, something that hadn't been there on Friday. "You saved the quarter," she said without turning around. "I patched a hole in a burning building," Corbin corrected, setting his bag down by the door. "Provo is a temporary fix. If we don't build proper redundancy into every regional hub by spring, this happens again, just somewhere else." She turned to face him, and for a moment the exhausted, formidable CO fell away entirely, replaced by someone who simply looked relieved, and a little bit like the woman who'd slid into a restaurant booth on Saturday night. "You really showed up today, Wexley." "I brought the panic," Corbin admitted, rubbing his face. "I'm terrified, Marlowe. I have a 7-year-old. I can't work 90-hour weeks and still get her to school on time." "You won't have to," Marlowe said, crossing the room to set her glass down on the desk. "You're going to build a team that actually tells you the truth, so you're not putting out fires alone at 9 o'clock at night. I'm not promoting you to punish you, Corbin. I'm promoting you because I finally found someone in this building I actually trust." She walked toward him slowly, stopping only a few feet away, and for the first time since he'd known her, the intimidating executive was entirely gone, replaced by someone quieter, softer, unmistakably the woman from the corner booth at Solane. "I told you," she said, voice dropping. "I wasn't going to let you pay for dinner." Corbin looked down at her, the exhaustion in his bones suddenly replaced by something electric and unfamiliar, a kind of hope he hadn't let himself feel in years. "I still owe you a real date," he said. "One that doesn't involve you firing anyone by dessert." "I don't have expensive taste, despite appearances," Marlowe said, the faintest smile pulling at her mouth. "I actually hate truffle oil. I haven't had a decent slice of pizza in 6 years." Corbin laughed, a real laugh, the first unguarded one he managed in longer than he wanted to admit. "Suri is going to demand you play board games with her. Fair warning, she cheats at Uno." "I'll crush her fairly," Marlowe said, entirely serious, which somehow made it funnier. Corbin reached out, hesitating only a fraction of a second before resting his hand gently against her waist, and she stepped into the space between them, closing the distance until the careful professional walls that had kept them apart for 2 years finally, completely came down. "Come on," Corbin said softly, nodding toward the door. "Let's go find some real pizza. I know a place that doesn't care what you do during the day." They left the glittering top floor together, past the empty cubicles and the darkened boardroom where everything had started 3 days earlier, out into the cool Denver night, an acting director and his CEO, an exhausted single dad and the woman who'd finally seen past the invisible version of himself he'd spent years perfecting. If you found yourself hoping Corbin would finally get a break, or felt the quiet, lonely weight Marlowe carried every single day at the top of that building, hit that like button right now. We all know what it feels like to hide the best parts of ourselves out of fear, so drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from tonight, and what you would do if you found out your blind date was actually your boss. Don't forget to share this with someone who needs a little workplace karma today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a news story every single week.